Hello, this is Jerry. Welcome back to the Old Testament prophets. Now, last week we finished our consideration of Lamentations. And today we'll start the small 3-chapter book of Habakkuk, also in this time period. Now, we know very little about him. In chapter 3, we're given a strong hint of Habakkuk's original vocation. In chapter 3, it says, a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet according to Shigionote. And Shigionote was a musical notation of some kind, introducing chapter 3 as a text to be used with singing in the temple. And in the last phrase of the last verse of the book, it says, to the choir master with stringed instruments. And that's a phrase that is used 55 times in the Old Testament, to the choir master. So this was for a Levite choir with an accompaniment of stringed instruments. So it's a well-developed song for temple worship. So it's common to understand that Habakkuk was a Levite musician before he was called to be a prophet, and that in his only scriptural writing he combined both callings. Now, the content of Habakkuk points to his ministry being around the time of Jeremiah, near those 3 deportations and the Babylonian captivity. And an interesting question is, who is the audience? Because the book is not preaching to the people. The book revolves around theological questions of Habakkuk with a final declaration. The godly remnant in Judah would be the most interested in the answers given here, though we hope other Jews might read it also. So it appears to be a book that is complementary to Jeremiah. Jeremiah has 52 chapters, written mostly to Judah as a nation, and then Habakkuk 3 short chapters for God's people among them. Jeremiah warned Judah to repent and to submit to Babylon as God's discipline, while Habakkuk pauses with the faithful remnant to reflect how God sovereignly and triumphantly works in history to accomplish his will. So, as we'll see, Habakkuk had a lot of questions, and they were more than idle curiosity. They were deeply moving to him. Was Habakkuk, as a child, forever asking, why and how come? Well, he may have been. He was very inquisitive, strongly opinionated, and very confident in his own views. And I'm almost sure Habakkuk never entered into these questions with the Lord with the idea that all this would be written down in Scripture. But, as we'll see, by the end of the book, he was probably glad to do so. And God uses these kinds of inquisitive people, as he uses people of all temperaments. And here we have a book in the Bible for a man asking questions that maybe we would not be so bold to ask God, but we might think about them and wonder about them. Like Lamentations, this was written in Hebrew poetry, though I'm not going to format it so on the slides. So, are you ready? Here we go. Chapter 1, verse 1. The oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. An oracle is a message from God, and this message comprises a most unusual dialogue between God and one of his prophets. Those few words are such a brief introduction, just barely enough words to establish this as Scripture, an oracle of God through the prophet. Often the first verses of a prophetic book introduce us to the prophet, what kings he was serving during, who his father was, maybe the hometown location. Not here. It's like Habakkuk bursts through the door and immediately blurts out his first question to God. As I read these, try to sense the deep emotions and frustration that would be behind these questions. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? Or cry to you violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. strife and contention arise. So the law is paralyzed, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted. Well, what do you think? A lot of heat and emotions behind these questions, right? I'm not saying he was mad at God, but he certainly was confused and frustrated with the present reality he faced. Habakkuk was ministering during the 11-year violent reign of Jehoiakim, then probably into the equally disastrous reign of Zedekiah. The other two kings here, Jehoahaz and Jehoiachin, were so briefly on the throne. So let's remind ourselves of them. King Jehoiakim was persecuting the prophets and anyone who was against his regime. God promised Jeremiah that he would always deliver him from persecution, but there were other prophets slain. For instance, we saw in Jeremiah 26 how Jehoiakim had Uriah the prophet chased all the way into Egypt and had him killed after he was brought back, no doubt as an example to the rest. Else, why bring him all the way back from Egypt instead of killing him there? Others were murdered who offended the crown. Jeremiah revealed about Jehoiakim, "But you have eyes and heart only for your dishonest gain, for shedding innocent blood, and for practicing oppression and violence." And 2 Kings noted, "The innocent blood that he," that is Jehoiakim, "had shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood." It was Jehoiakim who cut up the scrolls of the prophecies of Jeremiah piece by piece and threw them into the fire. So Habakkuk was not exaggerating about those wicked and violent times. So let's break down these questions. Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? That is, you don't answer. That God hears was certain. He's God. But he was not answering. Habakkuk has been praying about all these things for a long time. These questions, I'm sure, did not arise in a day. And the echo in Hebrew poetry here, "Or cry to you, violence, and you will not save." Just one word, violence. So dramatic. As he brings out in verse 4, this was violence toward God's righteous followers, his prophets and remnant, people Habakkuk serves and worships with. Basically, people around him are being killed or are victims of violence, but God never seems to show up and protect them. Why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you idly look at wrong? Habakkuk was very disturbed about all the violence and injustice immediately surrounding him, but then it seemed to Habakkuk that God was not so disturbed, as evidenced by the Lord's seeming lack of action. It didn't make theological sense that Habakkuk was more concerned than God here. Notice the word idly, a loaded term, pointing to the Lord indiscriminately seeing these sinners and sins. Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. All this strife and contention is right before him, close. Evil people competing and struggling against each other and against God's people. It filled society. Those were Habakkuk's questions. But then Habakkuk provides a conclusion of the matter. So the law is paralyzed, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted. The law of God was paralyzed, of no effect. Justice never was served against the perpetrators, which would only embolden evildoers. God gave human government as a deterrent to evil, but here the government was given to evil and not maintaining justice, which demoralizes good people like Habakkuk. Notice the object of their terror, the righteous. They're the obvious ones to attack and take advantage of. We hate them already, so with no justice, they could vent that dislike with impunity and maybe benefit also. Notice verse 4 says, justice never goes forth. That is, true justice. But there was a perverted justice going forth, the text said. Official decisions were being made, but they were twisted, not against the evil, but almost assuredly against the good. Those followers of the Lord, they're the real problem. evil declared good, and good evil. The modern world is filled with examples of twisted justice, including against Christians and other minority groups. The charges against Christian minorities in many countries are exaggerated or falsely claim blasphemy or trying to convert others. For instance, not long ago in India, a group of Christian women at a party were arrested for praying, which was taken as an attempt to force the conversion of others. Laws are regularly stretched to deprive Christians of work, to cut them off from inheritances, and countless other expressions of discrimination. In a nation where they already hate you and resent you, it's common the justice system will be twisted so that you're going to be the guilty ones. Habakkuk had been praying for God to act, but he had no hint that God was doing anything to push back evil or protect the good. Here's God's answer. Look among the nations and see, wonder and be astounded, for I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. The Lord responded, I'm already on these problems, Habakkuk. I'm working on something so astounding it would stretch your ability to believe. The answer is not right around you, but among the nations. For behold, I'm raising up the Chaldeans, that's an old word for Babylonians, that bitter and hasty nation, who march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. Okay, another reminder, what has Babylon recently done? Well, they rose up against their oppressor Assyria, just north of them, and defeated them at Ashur, Nineveh, Haran, and Carchemish. And while at Carchemish, they also defeated Egypt, that came to assist Assyria. And so Babylon became the new masters of the Near East, including Judah. They are dreaded and fearsome. Their justice and dignity go forth from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards, more fierce than the evening wolves. Their horsemen press proudly on. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle, swift to devour. They all come for violence, all their faces forward. They gather captives like sand. All the metaphors are wonderfully picturesque, swift and fierce as leopards, wolves, and eagles. Did you know that the golden eagles in North America can dive for their prey at almost 200 miles per hour? That's our fun fact for the day. Nothing preys on a golden eagle. They're at the top of the chain, and that's how Babylon is presented here, swift and invincible. And they capture prisoners like sand. How many grains of sand can you scoop and capture in your hand? A lot. That's how easy it was for them. At kings they scoff, and at rulers they laugh. They laugh at every fortress, for they pile up earth and take it. Then they sweep by like the wind and go on, guilty men, whose own might is their God. The Babylonians built siege ramps, just like the Assyrians before them and the Romans after them. They would take prisoner or slave labor and just build a ramp that ascends to the top of the wall. It took many months, but was very effective. On this picture is the remains of the Assyrian siege ramp at Lachish, Israel. An interesting last phrase, guilty men, whose own might is their God. Habakkuk was complaining of violence and injustice. Here come marauders filled with violence and their own sense of justice, swift, effective against any other military forces, and they take greedily. They're ungodly. Their own military power is their real God. God was setting up the Babylonians to discipline and judge Judah. So Habakkuk no doubt pondered this answer for a bit, and being Habakkuk, came out with new questions and complaints, because this was not the kind of answer from God he was praying for. He probably had in mind something like maybe God reviving the people and maybe turning to the Lord and a Josiah-like reformation in the land, which sounds much more desirable. but God knows what is truly needed to turn the people. So now we have a new round of burning questions from Habakkuk. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have ordained them as a judgment, and you, O Rock, have established them for reproof. In processing this answer, Habakkuk assures himself that the Lord is still their covenant God. This was not canceling that. This is discipline, not annihilation of us as a nation. We shall not die. But then, while he understands the decree of the Lord, Habakkuk still questions how Babylon qualifies to be the instrument of discipline. You who are of purer eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? The problem for Habakkuk has actually grown worse. In the first set of questions, Habakkuk was wondering how God could countenance Judah with all their sins because he is holy. But now God seems to be favoring an even more wicked pagan nation, giving them all these victories, and then using this unholy pagan nation to be an instrument in his hand against his own people. Habakkuk has also thought of a concluding illustration of the result of God's program of using Babylon. See what you think. You make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his dragnet, so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his dragnet, for by them he lives in luxury, and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? God has been setting up Babylon like a fisherman in a dominant position over the fish, which represents all those conquered peoples. Babylon just pulls up the helpless fish with hook or net, total superiority over their lives, with no care for the fish. And then the fisherman thanks his God for all this catch. God was making Babylon flourish as this catcher of nations, and their own paganism was flourishing as they gave thanks to their deities. How can that be good? And then Habakkuk adds one last question. How long is Babylon going to be allowed to do that to us and others? How long will we be like helpless fish to them? And then Habakkuk finishes with a flourish with these last words, I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower, and look out to see what he will say to me, and what I will answer concerning my complaint. Oh, the confident attitude of Habakkuk. He casts himself as being on a watchtower, waiting for an important message to arrive to the city, like he's king of a city, and awaiting that very important letter from another king. And Habakkuk was also eager to answer that with more questions. If you only read this verse, you would assume a conversation between equals. Well, understanding that this book was written not in real time through these questions, but afterward, when Habakkuk had a much clearer perspective, Habakkuk must have shook his head when recording his confident attitude here. Like he had really made a great argument. What could God say against all these ironclad arguments? Now, I don't have time today to cover the Lord's answer. It's best not to just get a little into it. We need to view it all at once. So in our last minutes, let me ask a question. Couldn't God have used something a lot less dramatic and violent to spiritually wake up some in Judah? I know. How about messages about what a great and forgiving God he is? Yeah, good thought, but that's what the prophets had been doing since the time of the first king, Rehoboam, or for about 350 years. And not just the prophets, but the temple ministry, the Levites and the priests, and the presence and witness of the remnant of believers. And there have been times of blessing under certain kings. Think of Hezekiah, of Josiah. So Judah had tasted and had seen the Lord was good. In contrast, their idolatry had brought them nothing but ruin and suffering over these centuries. And for many decades, the Lord had been warning about Babylon. So, yes, God knew it really did take this kind of drastic judgment. And even then, many did not turn. A host were killed by Babylon, or plague, or starvation in the siege. Many went into captivity still with their unbelief. But surely some turned to the Lord and joined that small remnant of believers. And somebody might think, that's a lot of trouble to achieve a relatively small amount of converts, of spiritual fruit. 3 deportations, the destruction of much of Judah, Jerusalem, and the temple, just so that a relatively small group will turn to the Lord. Well, actually, it was not too much trouble. God will take the time and trouble to reach the lost. As the divine evangelist, he will leave the 99 and will journey long and hard for that one. He will remove all comfort and safety and security from all to win those relatively few. Think of the value of each soul turned to the Lord. Nothing is of more value on this earth, Jesus taught. Ask one of those who turned back to the Lord, was it worth it to be violently dragged into captivity into another nation, to lose your own nation but find the Lord? Well, there's no question as to the answer, right? Well, next week, Lord willing, God's answer to Habakkuk. Thanks very much.